Hey, Ben Friedman here from the Beniverse Movie Channel, and today I am talking Barbie and Oppenheimer. Barbie, Oppenheimer, jeez, Barbenheimer, as they call it. I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm really excited because I've been eagerly anticipating both of these movies for different reasons. If you don't know me, I am located in Sacramento, which means I have a close relationship with Greta Gerwig's filmography, and I am a male who grew up in the 21st century, which means Nolan means a lot to me as a film fan. So I'm really excited to talk about both of these, like I said, for very different reasons. And there's actually a lot of similarities in both of these films that I'll kind of address in a non-spoiler way. So this is going to be a really exciting video to just kind of talk about and dive into this world. So let's just start with kind of my anticipation going into this movie. I was anticipating both of these movies. Oppenheimer, I believe, was my second most anticipated movie of the year after Across the Spider-Verse. And I think Barbie was definitely in the top 10. I actually want to say it was even like the top 6 or 7. I really wanted to see both of these movies. And the weeks leading up to it, I was starting to not necessarily get nervous, but I've been having a weird summer in terms of watching movies. I found a lot of the movies to be maybe a little underwhelming. There's been a lot of titles that I've liked but haven't loved quite as much as other people have. So going into this week, I was just like, is this going to be kind of another letdown? And it's kind of that great experience where it wasn't for me. I got enjoyment out of both of these films to varying degrees. I think both of these films are not flawless movies. In fact, I think both of them are fundamentally really flawed in certain sections. It just so happens that I didn't mind the flaws in these movies and they actually work to the benefit of the film. There's this like kind of charm that they add, or there's a passion of the filmmaker that's there that allowed me to kind of buy into this world more, and I'll kind of explore that as best as I can without getting too heavy into spoilers. But let's just start with the movie that I saw first. So for me, I saw Barbie first on Wednesday evening, and then the next day I saw Oppenheimer that Thursday, 70 millimeter at IMAX, at my local Esquire IMAX in downtown Sacramento. Let's start with Barbie. I think it's the easier movie to review, and here's the thing: I would not recommend excuse me, I would not recommend seeing both of these movies back to back. I know this whole Barbieheimer thing has like led people to do this double feature. I think it's actually a disservice to both of these movies. If you were to actually do it and you are committed to it, do start with Barbie. I think going into Oppenheimer and the graveness of that movie and jumping into Barbie, I think would be kind of disconcerting. So if you were to do this double feature, which again I'm not suggesting, do start with Barbie. I saw Barbie Wednesday night, packed crowd. Didn't fully know what I was getting into with this movie. I was expecting there to be kind of this meta element to it. It kind of reminded me of a blend of Elf slash uh, Lego movie, even like a little bit of like kind of that corporate cynicism that I think we've been seeing in films like Air or Flaming Hot this year. So going into this movie, I was kind of just curious what the tone of this movie was going to be. It had a little bit of a Truman Show vibe to it, I think, also being advertised. And when watching this movie, the first 10 minutes are not clicking with me. Barbie is not working for me for the first 10 minutes of this movie. Uh, and then as the film goes on, it actually really kicks into a high gear. And then I really enjoyed this movie throughout. Barbie stars Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, and has supporting performances from actors and actresses such as Michael Cera, America Ferrera, who's very good in this movie. Emma McKay from Sex Education is in this movie. You have other actors. I don't know if I mentioned. I think I mentioned Michael Cera, but there are other male actors. Simu Liu from Shang-Chi is in this movie, and this cast is having a lot of fun. And for this first opening scene, I was kind of just like, I get the jokes, I kind of get the tone. It's a little bit out of whack for me, where I'm just like, is this going to be the whole movie? Luckily, it's not. And when we get to the real world, that's actually kind of where I clicked into the movie the most. I think this is where the story really kicks a high gear, because this film is basically Barbie is having an existential crisis and goes to the real world and kind of learns about what the real world is and her role as an icon, as a toy, and kind of the controversy around Barbie since then. That's what this movie really focuses in on, and it does so pretty expertly. I was kind of shocked with the social satire that Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, the writers of this film, were able to get away with Barbie. There is a real discussion of, and this is going to piss off people like Ben Shapiro, who I know had a literal meltdown today on Twitter because he was forced to see this movie. There's terms in this movie such as feminism, the patriarchy, and if you're prone to get annoyed by those terms, I don't know what to tell you. I would say kind of like grow up and expand your reach and expand your horizons, but you're probably not at that point in your life, so don't see this movie and don't bitch about it on Twitter like a little baby. Ignoring that, because I know none of you are going to pay attention who are that type of people to do that. So going into Barbie, like I said, there's these ideas that I didn't fully expect to come away with Barbie, and it actually ended up being a really clever social satire about the female experience, specifically in America, and Barbie's role in kind of the past 50 to 60 years of the American female. And that was a really shocking way that this movie unfolds, and they do it with such care. This movie could be easily branded as cynical just due to the nature of it's a movie about a toy, and Mattel is in this movie, and Mattel isn't fully the bad guy. Will Ferrell is in the movie as the Mattel boss. He's very funny, though his role seems a little, not necessarily scatterbrained, but it didn't feel like they had a ton to do with the Mattel CEOs. It felt like a one-note joke at times, even though that joke was very funny. So there is this kind of nervousness that I'm starting to then creep up in me, where I'm just like, is this kind of like a pat on the back? And that's not what this movie is. It is an actual exploration of the history of Barbie in female culture, specifically with young children, like the ideals, some of the bad ideas that Mattel had with advertising Barbie, some of the bad products they've released, and it's done in a really clever and funny way. Margot Robbie is fantastic as the female Barbie in this movie. I say female Barbie. Her name is stereotypical Barbie in this film. I think she's absolutely wonderful. The comedy is really grounded in on her. And if she doesn't work, this movie doesn't work. Actually, fundamentally, this performance is so important. Even if she doesn't get the big laugh lines like, let's say, Ryan Gosling in this movie does. Ryan Gosling in this movie is exceptional. Like, I mean, this guy's always been a talented comedic performer, from movies like Crazy Stupid Love to, more specifically, The Nice Guys. Like, this guy has the goods as a comedic actor. In this movie, Greta Gerwig understands how to use Gosling to the best of her ability, and he is absolutely really funny in this movie. So worth it. I'll turn the TikTok camera on real quick. I never do this, but I am going to turn the TikTok camera on for Barbie. This is my big... This isn't a prediction, because this is not going to come true. But here is my one declaration on Barbie. If there was any justice, Ryan Gosling should probably get nominated for Academy Award for his role as Ken in Barbie. I fully, sincerely believe this. He is so laugh out loud funny in this movie. This is such a tricky performance that he is given, and the material that he could do, if given to a different person, the jokes could just tank and go horribly wrong. They never do. He's actually insanely on beat for this movie, and he has to ground actually a fair share of the emotion in this movie. I just think it's a really astute performance from Ryan Gosling. I think it's a very challenging performance, and under a different actor, this performance could have been a disaster and tanked this movie. Gosling does it all with sincerity, with emotion, with heart, with just such a bro energy that I don't even fully understand how to quantify, but it's there in this movie. I think he's wonderful. I think Ryan Gosling should get a nomination. I know it's never happens, but I'd be glad to see him on that list. So that's my little talk on Ryan Gosling. But kind of going back into this movie, all the performers in this movie are very funny. Michael Cera has a few really funny lines. Kate McKinnon, who's typically someone that I don't always care for in movies, I thought she was really good in this movie. I think other actors that pop up in this movie, like a Simu Liu, I thought were very well handled. America Ferrera is another actress that I just think she gets one speech, I should say, in particular, that could have been a disaster. And under her hands, it's actually probably the most emotionally impactful scene in the movie. People are going to find Barbie heavy-handed. Like, there's no way about it. Like, there are very specific scenes that are meant to generate a certain reaction and even kind of do that thing where it pauses for a second so the audience can clap. I can tell you, opening day, that worked to wonderful effects. I didn't mind it. I really did not mind those scenes. I actually thought they worked within the context of the movie. I think they're fairly well written. I also don't mind when a director kind of jumps on a soapbox and kind of just starts talking and sharing their opinions. That's kind of why I like directors. Like, I want to see them bring in their style and their beliefs into filmmaking. If you're annoyed by that, you probably will be annoyed with certain scenes in this movie because it is a very... Greta Gerwig is a very classical feminist feminist reader, I should say. Like, she knows all the classic texts of feminism. It's been very clear in her filmography. She really refers to them. Specifically, some of the writings that come out of the 1970s, they're all in here, and you can feel that influence. You can also feel the influence of films like Lady Bird. There's a real strong connection of mothers and daughters in this movie that I think works to just really great emotional effect. Like I said, overall, there is messiness in this movie. Like, I can't deny that there are jokes. I would say the joke pattern in this movie is 60, 10, and 20. Is that add up? No, 60, 10, and 30. That's the correct math. 60, 10, and 30. 60% of the jokes hit. 30% of the jokes do not hit. And 10% of the jokes are some of the funniest jokes I've seen in a movie this year. And yeah, so there are some misses. There are some jokes that just bombed to me and I did not find funny. But the ones that did hit, some of the hardest I've laughed this whole year. Specifically, there's this montage with Ryan Gosling when they get to the real world, and I don't want to spoil anything of it, but it's very funny, and you'll know the montage because it's very clear and it's very self-referential in many ways. Like I said, overall, I like Barbie. I should mention the production design of this movie is incredible. The world of Barbie, it really does feel like a playset come to life. You can really feel the influence of directors like The Truman Show in here, where it's just like this kind of fake feeling world. It's just a really beautiful color palette. It's a really fun movie to watch. Highly recommend Barbie this weekend. I had a blast with it. I'm going to hit the 4 out of 5 star movies, even if it's a movie that there are certain issues in that I won't get into a non-spoiler review. I won't touch on some of those issues, but I will say that there are some... The film is very silly, and there's kind of just this wrap-up that happens at the ending, and it doesn't really go anywhere, and it really does just becomes a really, really goofy. And at times that allows the message of the film to kind of get lost at times. I didn't have a huge issue with it, and I think this will be a fun rewatch. This is one of the things that's allowing me to get it from 3.5 stars to actually get it to 4 stars, is because I think I'm going to rewatch this movie a lot. Anyway, that is my review on Barbie, which means I guess we should jump over to the next review, the film that I saw the next day, Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. For those who do not know this is based on a book from, I think, 2005. It's called American Prometheus. It won the author a Pulitzer. Basically, the premise of this book is it's a biography on the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. And this movie is essentially a race to build the atomic bomb and the fallout of that. Cillian Murphy, who has been a frequent collaborator with Chris Nolan, plays J. Robert Oppenheimer in this movie to really incredible effects. We'll get into his performance in a second. And this is a cast of who's. A lot of those who's I will not spoil because they come in for a scene or two and they steal the movie for that minute or two that they are on screen. Some of the ones that I will mention that are in this movie and are very clearly advertised, you have actors like Robert Downey Jr. in this movie. You have actors like Alden Ehrenreich. You get guys like Josh Hartnett, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that. If I am, I apologize. You have guys like him. You have Matt Damon in a really good supporting turn. Emily Blunt plays Oppenheimer's, I believe it would be second wife. Florence Pugh kind of plays his first wife / mistress. It's a cast of who's, and I'm not even really breaking the surface on who's in this movie because there's about 20 more really famous actors in this movie, all doing really incredible work on this. This is a very different film for Christopher Nolan. And like I said, I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. that doesn't always mean that I love his style or love his sensibilities. This is a guy that I think can be a little too cold at times. I think he can struggle to express emotion. I also think he isn't always the greatest storyteller. I think he can have incredible broad stories, and I think the screenplay can really get lost at times, and the dialogue between characters can get really muddled. What's so interesting then about Oppenheimer is this is a talking movie. This is 3 hours of men just talking in rooms, and it just so happens that the implications of these talks are the atomic bomb. And that's where I found this movie so enriching, because this is a movie I've never quite seen from Christopher Nolan. If I had to compare it to any other movie, I think the most apt comparison, and I think it's one that Christopher Nolan himself has even referenced, is JFK, Oliver Stone's 1991 JFK, which is a movie about the conspiracy of the people who killed JFK. That's what this movie is, because I wouldn't say based on how Christopher Nolan has talked about that, there's objective facts in this movie and there are subjective facts, and it is at your time, your responsibility to kind of figure out what is being true, what is being presented as true, and what maybe is understood as kind of historical logic, but not necessarily the definitive conclusion. We don't know certain of these conversations that took place behind rooms, but we do know who Robert Oppenheimer is, so we do know some of the broad ideas that he lived on, some of the ideas and people that he based around himself, so we do know that history, thus we are able to infer, and that's what Nolan does really well in this movie. As someone who literally studied history in college, I found this a completely enriching experience. Oppenheimer is told literally 4 stories kind of all colliding in on themselves. It is not a linear narrative. It is not Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. There are a very clear Act 1 ending, Act 2 ending, but it's not done in any way that feels linear. Everything is kind of building to what we know this film is building to, and that can be really off-putting. In a film like Dunkirk, I didn't think this effect worked to any great degree. In fact, I found it convoluting the story of Dunkirk. In a film like Oppenheimer, I think it only added tension to the screenplay and the stakes and the aftermath of that, because we do follow the aftermath of this film, and I don't think that's a spoiler by any degree. It's all kind of just woven in together, and you just get this sense of dreads, you get this fallout, you get the real just emotions of before, during, and after. And it works to such wonderful effects, because there will be a scene where Oppenheimer's talking about the building of the atomic bomb in theory in the 1930s. And then we'll then cut to a scene in the 1950s after it's happened, and that 1950s then informs a flashback that we have to the 1940s, where they are actually building the bomb. And so that for me really added an experience. This film is editing galore. Here's another, just like Oscar prediction right away, you will see Oppenheimer nominated for Best Film Editing, and right now, I think this film is the clear frontrunner. I think this film would be the clear frontrunner in any year it's nominated for Best Film Editing. It's truly a spectacular job at editing. Like I said, it's so intercut, it's so forensic, and this forensic nature of this film really adds to Christopher Nolan's just feel of this, and you can really feel this frustration, anger, and anxiety in this editing. It's such a cool tool that the director is able to utilize to benefit his story. This is a very emotional Christopher Nolan movie from a guy who is not an emotional guy as a filmmaker. He's a very sincere filmmaker, but he's not somebody that I would consider an overly emotional filmmaker. In this film, you really understand Christopher Nolan as a person, as a father, as a filmmaking, as someone of a self-biography on Christopher Nolan. This is a movie about a genius who kind of feels the weight of the world on his shoulders, and to some degree you can then kind of feel that and kind of also then describe it to Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, where he's this filmmaker that feels an immense responsibility to basically preserve film. I'm not saying it's a perfect translations, but there are certainly, you can understand where Nolan is relating to Oppenheimer as a person, and I think that's very interesting. And you can also understand, and I think this factor is really laid out in this movie, You understand how Nolan relates to Oppenheimer as a parent. And that's a really crucial understanding of this movie. This film does have some of the typical Christopher Nolan flaws. The female characters are very much at service of Oppenheimer. Florence Pugh is probably the most wasted in this movie in the sense that she doesn't get a lot to do, but what she does is very important to the Oppenheimer story. It's just as an actress, it kind of feels like she is shoehorned in to playing the mistress and who delivers one really critical scene. And this one critical scene, or I guess there's really two, but there's one specifically, and you'll notice it very much in the movie. It's after a lovemaking sequence, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you see the film. This is kind of, to some degree, I wouldn't say necessarily the thesis of Oppenheimer, but there is a scene where he is reading something to the Florence Pugh character. And it's in that moment you kind of understand the stakes, the emotion, and then when you kind of get to the third act and you learn the history of Oppenheimer and this woman, it makes it far more devastating, and it's also kind of the only connection that we have to Oppenheimer as humans, because Oppenheimer is not a conventional good guy, he's not a conventional bad guy, he's a guy that's a really complicated, closed-off guy. So it's hard to bear and understand emotion of Oppenheimer, so this Florence Pugh scene really delivers a lot of it, but she is in service of Oppenheimer. You don't feel like she is much of a character outside of it, to the point where she literally leaves the film for extended periods of times, and you kind of forget about her by design. Emily Blunt is literally sidelined for a majority of the movie, except they finally give her one scene, and her one scene is killer. That's really like the factor of this movie. There's so many talented actors coming to play for Nolan, and when they come to play for Nolan, they just deliver an A game. They come out and leave, and they're spectacular in these roles. I don't want to really talk about them, but I did mention a few of them. Rami Malek is one of these guys. Rami Malek is in the movie for probably a total of maybe 5 minutes, and he's absolutely incredible in those 5 minutes. And there's a lot of actors like that. There's other then supporting actors who are in this movie more heavily. Robert Downey Jr. is a performance that you're going to hear a lot about. Turn on the TikTok cameras right now. Huge prediction from me. Robert Downey Jr., come March 10th, 2024, when the Oscar ceremony airs, not only will Robert Downey Jr. be nominated for his performance in Oppenheimer, you're going to see Robert Downey Jr. win an Academy Award Best Supporting Actor for his role in Oppenheimer. I think he's legitimately that great. I think any year Robert Downey Jr. would be the front runner. So if you can take that bet, if you can find somehow where Vegas is going to take that bet really early, take it right now. I'm money in the bank to me. I feel so good about this prediction. I know it's way too early to make a prediction like this, but I feel great in this, and he is so deserving of that. This performance that Robert Downey Jr. does is so complicated. It is so... And this is where I'm really trying to be careful with spoilers, because if you don't know who this man is in history, it becomes very... It can kind of come as a surprise to some of the things that he does or doesn't do, all that. What I will say is Downey Jr. is tasked with playing a very hard character. Outside of Oppenheimer, probably the most confusing character to get a read of. And much of the film is asked to like kind of bear the weight. Like Robert Downey Jr. is asked to bear much of the weight in this movie, where it's just like, well, there's going to be long extended scenes where you're kind of the protagonist for a majority of like these next 15-20 minutes. Like, kind of do your thing. And Downey does it in spectacular degrees. Very nuanced performance, very real performance, very scary performance at times, very funny performance. It just uses the whole kind of meal that is Robert Downey Jr. as an actor. There's so much to this performance that I love. Cillian Murphy, let's talk about him, the man of the hour. This is a spectacular performance. You will never see another better type of performance in a movie like this. I mean, this is truly just revolutionary, insightful, deep, profound work that Cillian Murphy is doing, and it's a very soft performance. Murphy, as an actor, is not an over-the-top. He's a very subdued actor, and that's how Oppenheimer is portrayed in this movie. And based on American Prometheus, that really sounds like how Oppenheimer is portrayed in general and kind of understood. So it's a very layered performance, and it's also a performance that feels very reserved. It's not this over-the-top performance, but Murphy just does so much acting, specifically through his like piercing blue eyes. There is some devastating scenes in there. One actor that I wanted to mention, and I'm blanking on his name, he plays Albert Einstein in this movie, which again, not a spoiler if you've seen the trailers, because Einstein is in those trailers. This actor who plays Einstein is also incredible. Again, this is, I just keep kind of hitting back to like every actor who's in this movie is really good. I don't think there's a weak link in this movie in terms of acting. Even ones whose stories are a little sidelined, like the Florence Pugh character, they are great at what they are giving. They're just not giving a lot. Oppenheimer does suffer this idea that I kind of talked about earlier, where it is very convoluted and it feels very slow at times. The first 30 minutes of this movie are a drag. They're a drag in a good way, though, and they really do inform the rest of the 2.5-hour movies. Watching it for the first time, though, you do really feel the length of it. There's some sound editing in this movie. There's some like really technical parts that I could talk about. It does have the Nolan question of, are you deaf? Like, there's some weird sound mixing where I'm just like, you're really like, why can't I hear what is on screen right now? Like, I'm struggling to hear it, and I'm seeing it in like 70 millimeter IMAX. Like, in theory, I'm seeing it in the best possible situation for me to watch it, and yet I still had at times trouble hearing it. There's some of those critiques. In terms of the actual filmmaking, though, it's pretty impeccable. The third act does take a very direct turn in this movie, and it does become a little bit more conventional and straightforward compared to the rest of this movie. I like that, but I can also see where it becomes a drag. Like I said, this is not a perfect movie. It's a very impassioned movie by Christopher Nolan. This is a movie that I didn't know he had in him, to be honest. Like I said, I compared this a little earlier to JFK, Oliver Stone's JFK. What's so interesting is how sincere this movie is, and yet it's still very similar to JFK. Because JFK, if you've never seen Oliver Stone's JFK, which I think is also a masterpiece, is a movie that is deeply inherently cynical. And in this movie, it's not. Like, it's very heavy on its burden. Like, you really feel the emotions, the weight of this. In JFK, you really feel like these characters are almost kind of bemused by this. In Oppenheimer, you really feel the horror of this, and it plays like a true horror film. The sequence that everyone will probably be talking about in this movie involving an explosion, this scene is a horror film. It is 30 minutes of probably the best filmmaking Christopher Nolan has ever done in his career. Point blank. Legitimately was stunned during this sequence. And like I said, there's a lot that works in here. There's some elements that maybe don't work as well. It is very impassioned at times. It's very cold at times. It's kind of hard to get a read and engage on some of these characters. It's all edited so quick and fast. And like, technically I'd have criticisms of it, but I'm just kind of so in awe of the filmmaking and what Nolan is accomplishing and trying to accomplish. And it's just the biggest swing to the fences I've ever seen Nolan do. Of a guy who I think every movie he goes for, he tries swinging for the fences. He does that in this movie as well. And it connects so much. It's just such a really impressive film. And I will just say the final 5 minutes of this film is a masterpiece in itself. I really liked Oppenheimer. It's well worth your time. I hope one day I get to do like the spoiler review where I just get to really dive deep into this movie. Hopefully I get to do that sometime soon. But for that, Oppenheimer, I'm giving it the full 5-star review here. I think it is a 5-star out of 5-star movie. Like I said, are there criticisms of this movie? Sure. I don't care about the criticisms, honestly. I think it's just it's my favorite movie of 2023 at this moment. I don't see any movie taking that throne. I mean, I guess Martin Scorsese's making a movie, and when Martin Scorsese makes a movie, you have to assume that he could take that and become my favorite movie of the year. But, like, just in all the elements of it, like, this movie really worked for me. I think it's one of Nolan's best, if not even his best. I think it's a really impactful movie. I found it well worth your time. Oppenheimer, 5 out of 5 stars from me. Anyway, that's my discussion. That's my talk on Barbenheimer. Which ones have you seen? Are you going to see a double feature? Which, again, do not suggest. Have you seen Oppenheimer first? Are you seeing Barbie? What is your plan for this weekend? This is great. I love when movies are relevant. This is the first time in quite a while that I feel like both films are in the cultural zeitgeist. I can't think of the last time a movie really took over the cultural zeitgeist. Maybe Avengers Endgame really felt like a huge event. This really feels like a huge event. Both films, I hope both films succeed in really wonderful ways this weekend. Anyway, thank you all for watching this video. My name is Ben Friedman here from the Beniverse Movie Channel. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and take care.